So you're thinking about selling the business, and I wanted to address, the different kinds of help you can get, and in particular, bankers in the process, and why I actually think they're useful. You probably know that I'm a bootstrapper and that I have, championed insourcing and kind of doing things on your own in a great many ways. But I do think that when you get to the deal process, it's such a large scale process that having, some help on your side is important. Of course, I should say this. Maybe this isn't technically true, but lawyers are essentially mandatory. I think if the other side comes along and you don't have counsel, they might just laugh at you and walk away. That's insane. If you actually get to the point of the due diligence or the documents and you don't have a legal team at all. So that's table stakes. That's why I'm not even addressing it. But in terms of bankers, there are plenty of companies that sell without bankers, and I'll make the case for why they're useful and the value that I saw in my own experience. So firstly, I'll put out, here's a note in terms of what you pay. In my personal experience, well, that's what we paid, so a couple percent. If you compare this to what you pay, or what traditionally, maybe things are starting to change now, but until very recently, 6% is not uncommon in the housing market, right? In terms of what sellers' commissions are historically, with realtors and whatnot. And so when you think about 2% as opposed to that, so you're definitely paying a much smaller percentage. For most people, selling a home is the largest, and I'll label this, but selling a home is the largest transaction that they will ever make. And so, yet they're paying 6% on it. So if you're just paying a couple percent on the M&A side, hey, at least it's cheaper. Of course, on a much larger sum of money, hopefully, and that's why it still makes sense to the bankers. Well, why the bankers are useful, though? So one, running a competitive process, creating the veneer or the reality of actual competitive situation where there's multiple bidders, and even if you don't have multiple bidders, the potential buyers, they don't know that. And so it can still help drive valuation. So that's one. The other is to kind of be the adult in the room. You're probably going to find yourself, fighting for the valuation. In general, whether it's realtors or whether it's bankers, they want to get the transaction across the finish line because they don't get paid otherwise. And so they will have a tendency to accept a lower price than you may be willing to accept. So you might be the one that's fighting for your valuation, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's great to have a banker in the room to essentially, like I said, to be the adult and to calm temperatures down. So, in my last M&A transaction, this was a key role that they played in making sure that the parties kept talking through multiple rounds of back and forth negotiation. And so being the adult, keeping the parties talking, and getting you across the finish line, that's value. Obviously, if a deal falls apart, well, then you've lost a tremendous amount. And so if they can even be, a partial bridge there. So they are being the adult in the room, and they are, I would call it, creating a bidding war. That's their goal. Now, they don't always get that, but creating a bidding war or the veneer of one, of course, helps you drive valuation. We knew our acquirers. Last transaction, selling HiddenLevers to Orion, we knew our buyers quite well, but it still helped to have the bankers sort of intermediating it because it did create that bidding war, and it did create multiple sources of interest. And even though our strategic buyer that we ended up closing with, that they had the highest bid, there was no way for them to know that they weren't competing against others. And so that provides a lot of value. And that's why I think bankers fundamentally are useful, and that 2% is not an unreasonable amount to pay, for that help.